Fabio, thank you so much for joining us today. Really excited to have you on the podcast and hear a lot about your journey and stories. Thought we'd kick off straight away for our listeners, and I love to hear how you think one of your friends would introduce you at the pub if they were describing who you are and what you do.
Okay. Well, thanks, Karl. I'm excited to be here. So I think it depends if that person like works in cybersecurity or not. Many of my friends don't. So I mean, if you would ask them, they probably say, he's that hacker guy, because that's what kind of sticks with people. That even though that's not really what I do anymore, I've been doing the offensive security side of things for a while. It's not really my primary focus anymore, but still, it's the hacker, because that's what people easily remember, right?
You're the man in the Matrix with all the green characters on your
Yeah,
screen
right,
24 hours a
right,
day.
exactly. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. Well, you said it's something you used to do, but you don't do so much now. When you first kind of got into the industry, into cybersecurity, how did that happen for you?
Yeah, so that was about 10 years ago. I was basically, I mean, already when I was like a kid, where I was maybe 12, 13, around there, I remember reading these, I found these things online where, they describe how to do hacking, right? Whatever that meant back then, or in those types of context, because it was basically, explaining like, you can log on to these open SMTP server and spoof the sender address. And for me, it was like, wow, I can become anyone. And, I kind of had that little thing. I didn't really follow through like in my teenager years, but then I started studying, went to like IT engineering, and then I did the master's in IT, like security ish. I mean, there was some security stuff, not really too focused on security though. Um, and then my favorite courses were when they were talking about pen testing and try to do some hacking. And I knew a little bit of web development, so things like SQL injection, those simple initial things. And then I got into a company which was actually Truesec, which is still the company where I work at. So I started doing my master thesis at Truesec about 10 years ago. And that's how I got into the industry. And then I had an academic background, so you study a lot of the theory, you try some things yourself, but then you come, to the real world and you see how things actually work, and then you start learning. And then I had my journey at Truesec, started from penetration testing, red teaming, and all that type of stuff. And then I've done a few years into incident response, threat intelligence. I was a technical lead for different teams at Truesec, and nowadays I'm CTO at Truesec. Things are a bit different than when I started 10 years ago. We were maybe 20, 30 people. Now we're almost 300. So things look a little bit different.
That's huge growth. Gosh, incredible. And congratulations for that as well. I know that's very recent that's happened. I'm going to wind back slightly. When you first joined Truesec, you said there you had quite an academic background, and it sounded like the kind of actual real world pen testing was quite new to you.
Yeah.
Just from my kind of research earlier, I believe you tried to start automating some of that when you first joined.
Yeah,
Can you
yeah.
just explain a little bit about what you did there?
Sure. No, I mean that was actually my master thesis project. So
Okay.
because I wanted to get into this industry, right? So I started talking to different companies. I came to Sweden like around that time. So then I wanted, I was looking for companies in Stockholm, where I was located, and I still am, that would take in students doing their master thesis projects. And then I was just asking, what would be something that could work for you, like that would be interesting for you, and it would still, satisfy the requirements for the university to actually get like a valid project. And then, I found Truesec, and they were working a lot with penetration testing. And so then we were discussing, okay, like it would be nice to try and remove some of the amount of work that we do. And for me, that was a great opportunity to actually start learning how real penetration testing was done. So for me, it was primarily a learning experience. But then I set it up as a project. So analyzing, okay, what are these people actually doing when they go and test their clients, and what to look for, and how many of those things are always repeated, always the same, and we can kind of either script or put it in some kind of just see what we can automate out of the process, which again for me was primarily a learning experience. Yeah, I mean, we didn't really ended up like using whatever I built. It was more a proof of concept to see, like, compare different tooling and see how we can reproduce the outcome and things like that. So kind of like scientific approach, with then in practice is not maybe that usable. But there were some good learnings that we implemented into more mature tools later on in my times as pen tester. So I was good on it all.
I was thinking that must be really difficult to try and automate a lot of the work, because every environment that you approach would be slightly different. So there's so many different variables that you'd have to bring in. Like, gosh, that must have been quite a thesis and quite a huge project.
Yeah, the thing also, I mean, as a like an inexperienced, student coming out of university, say, yeah, let's just automate the whole process. Very optimistic that was gonna be so easy, right? Like, yeah, sure. Why hasn't anyone done it before? Well, because it's actually kind of hard. But again, I learned a lot in the process. But that primarily taught me like the difference between tooling and people, right? And how much is actually important that you have real people really understanding the client's environment or whatever is the scope of what you're testing, and actually trying to identify what the real problems are. That being said, tools are important. I mean, if we didn't have tools, we would waste a lot of time actually doing things that tools can find. So as long as we understand what the tools can do and use them for that, that's fine. But I wouldn't just call like an automated scan a penetration test. So there are learnings, and I think in the end, it's about finding the right combination of tooling and people, right?
To put yourself in your kind of CTO role and think of your younger self approaching you, what's something that you're interested in, or a problem that you're interested in solving that I guess other people aren't so interested in, that would make a good thesis for somebody else?
Uh, so as part of my role as CTO, I'm focusing on making sure that the different technologies and ways that we deliver our services across the different things we do can actually work together to provide more value. And I'm gonna put that as an example, because we do penetration testing and red teaming and all that side of things. We do incident response, we do threat intelligence, we do monitoring the SOC. And it becomes very, very interesting when you start putting all those pieces together and try to get the like holistic perspective. So like, how do you apply threat intelligence to decide what type of vulnerabilities are more important to check than others? Or how do you learn from an incident response case? You take those learnings and you you enrich that with some studies. So that's like the threat intelligence side of things, and you push it back to maybe monitoring or are monitoring the SOC to maybe build new rules based on a ongoing attack that we see from an incident response mission we're doing. So putting those pieces together becomes really, really interesting, and it's something we're doing on our side. But I think if I were starting and looking into this industry, it's really interesting to see how you put these pieces together. And it doesn't need to be
Hmm.
overcomplicated, like hundreds of systems and integrations and stuff, which you might think that that's what this involves. But it's really just making decisions that are based on learnings from other areas, because it's easy to start working in silos. Like, yeah, I do pen testing, I do just that, and I have my own way of defining what's important, and or I do like my instant response, I solve the case and move on to the next, or I do monitoring. This is my set of rules. Just having an extra layer on top of it becomes very, very important. And I think in the future it's going to become even more important, because we need to have a better, uh, we need to have a more efficient approach to cybersecurity. So if I were to starting were to be starting this field now, I would definitely look into that.
Amazing, thank you. And I guess when we're talking about efficiencies and we're thinking about growth in industry, do you see artificial intelligence, machine learning playing a part in that efficiency for you as a defender?
I mean, yes, but it all depends on what we mean by that, right? I mean, it's a lot of buzzwords around that, right? So, I mean, what is AI? What you know, is it a lot of logic applied to a bunch of scripts, or is it more than that? And I mean, we could argue. I think it depends on the system and it depends who you talk to. Uh, I mean, ultimately, yes, I think it definitely will have a role. It has a role, but it kind of goes back to that trade-off between automation and human on top of it, right? And just understanding what the limitations are. Now, the boundary might change over time. I think that's where maybe more so-called AI would come into place, just shifting that boundary. But I think in the end, there will always be both components in the picture.
I like the way you spoke of it. There's tooling and there's people, and they're very different, but they need each other in that kind of symbiotic relationship. And I'm thinking about Truesec and that journey you went on to kind of grow to, you said over 300 employees now. What's been the biggest difference in Truesec from when you kind of first started to where you are today?
And there are many things. So I think when it comes to, I mean, one main difference is the switch in the last few years to more of a managed service approach. So things that are more scalable.
Mhm.
We were primarily a consultancy based organization before. Now, for a big part, we still are, but we're moving more towards managed services, things that can scale better. Um, and that obviously makes a difference because it's a different way of working. We can help a lot more companies, organizations, so we have a lot of more customers, so there's more volume. Then you also get more data, which you can get insights from and you can feed back into the system. So everything scales a lot differently nowadays compared to when I started, which was a lot more ad hoc type of working. um, and then I would say, I mean, we also have areas that we work in now that we didn't have at all before. For example, threat intelligence is relatively new, at least being formalized as its own unit or department in the last maybe 3-4 years. And when I started, we didn't have that. Uh, we definitely didn't do nearly as much incident response as we do today. We maybe do a few incident cases when I started. Uh, Now we have a team of 30 people dedicated just to incident response, plus another like 60, 70 that can be added as they need. Uh, and I think last year in 2021 we did mm, between somewhere like 160 or 170 incidents just last year, meaning like actual like full investigations of whether it's ransomware or espionage operations or things like that. Um, so
That's
that
absolutely
Yeah,
incredible.
so that volume was not even imaginable with the amount of people we had 10 years ago.
Gosh, that's just amazing that you've been able to kind of grow and bring along such a large group of talented people as well. We start to think about the kind of skills that you require to do each of those roles and attract them into the organization. I think that's just absolutely incredible, and congratulations to you and the rest of the team for being able to do that. Um, and then kind of thinking a bit more about you as well during that growth. You've obviously recently become the CTO of
Mhm.
TrueSec, and again, congratulations for
Thank you.
that. How did that happen? In a way, I guess there's a lot of people who listen to our podcast who kind of aspire one day to be in that
Mhm.
role. So, how did you end up getting there, and what sort of advice would you give people on the way?
I I I don't think it's a very like common way of getting to this position, or maybe it is. I'm not sure. I don't have so much to compare to, but I think, I mean, because I started, like I said, I started as a student doing my master thesis, and I kind of like over the years I went through a lot of the different areas, and I've done that work myself. So I was a consultant that like red teaming, incident response, threat intelligence. I built internal systems. So I had a role in the past few years already of like an internal technical lead, so across different teams, right? So I was working, for example, grabbing the data from or the learnings, the incidents from the incidents we did, make sure that our threat intelligence department had enough information to do their own research, make sure that their output would be fed back into what we monitor in the SOC, and then back to help more IR cases. So I already had that role, like from a very technical and like deep dive perspective into projects. Um, so then, as we started growing, uh, there is the clear need of aligning more of the business strategy or what we are doing at the high level to how we actually do that from a technology perspective, stuff that we build, new services we bring up, how they work together. So so as we were growing, the need for that role kind of started appearing, and then I mean it was natural to have me fill in that gap, because I already had a lot of the history here. I knew the people, I knew the teams. I've done the work myself. I know what systems we have in place. So it was just very natural for me to take that spot.
That's an amazing position to be in. I think having that broad experience across so many different departments and kind of pulling things together, I think you're going to be set up for success in your new role. So that sounds really, really interesting. I think a lot of our readers and listeners could probably relate to that as well, of being the intersection of all the technical questions, having the visibility across all those different systems. That's really helpful. Thank you.
I mean, to give an advice, really an important component of this is that is to have multiple perspectives on different areas of cybersecurity. Offensive security is one thing, or so-called red team, right? Or blue team as well, or purple team, whatever you want to call them together, and doing the monitoring, or doing the hardening for your clients, or building secure infrastructure and all that stuff. So it's quite common that you focus on something, right? You may be a great pen tester, but you wouldn't be able to maybe help a customer build a new solution that is secure. Or maybe you just do that part and you wouldn't be able to really find vulnerabilities. Or you focus a lot on like doing threat hunting. You use, I don't know, EDR, CMs, whatever you use, but you don't really know how to fully exploit a system or find vulnerabilities or link them together. So I think what really helps me now in my position is that I had a little bit of all of those over the years. So it's very easy for me to relate to a problem that a certain team or even a customer might have, uh, which makes this suggested solution a lot more practical. So like, you know, now from an internal perspective, say that we have an issue in getting, an understanding of what's happening in an instant response case, then, well, I mean, it's natural to talk to maybe a red teamer, or someone that is used to research those type of vulnerabilities that's been used in that case, to understand how it really works, and maybe ask that person, okay, if you would have this access, and you were using these tools, what do you think was the objective here? Why would they use this tool when they already had this access? So those type of questions, if you already have that perspective, you can answer it yourself. Sometimes, or at least you know who to talk to, or what type of, or how to ask the question. It's sometimes just small things, but they help a lot. They help a lot in projects, like I said, like solving a specific incident response case, for example, from a red team perspective. But also in my role now, if I need to think like, okay, how do we help customers to actually fixing the vulnerabilities that matter? Well, how do you find the vulnerabilities that matter? Well, there's going to be a number of tools you need to use, right? You need to know your assets, and you need to have a good coverage. Probably want to do some scanning and like automated stuff. Then how do you know what's important? I mean, normally you end up with a list of hundreds or thousands of vulnerabilities every year that come from tools, from pen tests, and that kind of stuff. And I used to produce those reports and just deliver it to customer, and I knew there was just a PDF that was going to end up on a pile of other PDFs, which maybe someone is going to look at the end of the year and decide we need to fix this 150 before we go to that 200th vulnerability. So we're just going to ignore that now. So how do you make that into something that actually brings more value? So having the perspective of, okay, but I mean, I know that just all the stuff where we learn from IR, all the stuff where we learn from our research in threat intelligence, we know what the threat actors are using to exploit systems. So focus on that first. I mean, it makes sense.
That leads me nicely into one of the things that I think we spoke about in kind of the research call was you've personally and as an organization dealt with a lot of attacks that have ended up being instigated by kind of very sophisticated nation state level threat actors. Do you think having that kind of wider visibility helps you attribute them to that level of sophistication, or how are you able to kind of have that visibility and that understanding?
So attribution is very hard, and especially tooling that today are very advanced make it even harder, because it might be just that the tool is very advanced. The actor behind is maybe not that advanced, but it becomes quite confusing from an investigation perspective to understand, how much of a sophisticated attack this actually is. So, uh, uh, so looking at the tools, of course, is one thing, but then there can be very small things that actually quite clearly point to a sophisticated actor, and it can be. Uh, it can be I'll give you an example. So we were investigating this case earlier this year, and they were doing some password spraying attack, pretty standard. You try a couple passwords for a long list of users, and they got some valid credentials, and then they log on to the VPN, and well, so the account didn't have an MFA set up as it happened. So the threat actors set one up themselves because it was required, but right. So, but it was not actually set up for the first time for that user. So they did set up the second factor themselves, and then they got into the network. And nothing special here, right? But then you look what they did next, and uh, so initially, they logged on from an IP address. I think it was in the US, like some VPN provider with an exit point in the US. And this was a global company, and they were using an account from an office in France, right? Because they had an office there, and the account was a person working in that office. So the first connection came from the US. And then after a while, they checked some things inside and they disconnected, and they reconnected back from an IP address located in France.
Oh, okay.
Right. So that's a small thing that, if you didn't really care about being stealthy, you would just keep going with your initial IP, right? You're inside. Why would you even bother to disconnect, wait some time, and then connect back from a French IP? Well, the user was French, right? So could be a coincidence. But then they did something else too, because they started enumerating all the internal systems and getting all the names of the computers in the different offices. Then they disconnected again, and when they came back from another French IP, when they started authenticating to other internal systems, which is an activity that shows the host name where you're coming from, they picked a host name that was exactly the same as one of the existing hosts in the French office.
Oh, wow.
So they were coming from France, and they were using the same name of a French computer while using a French account. So you see all these things, and then it clearly shows that they have a very high interest in trying to stay under the radar. So those type of things can help you to at least get an idea for the level of sophistication. Then tooling as well, like they deploy malware. Do they deploy like just an obfuscated version of Cobalt Strike, which is very common, or stuff like that, or do they have a fully custom built malware with lots of capabilities and all that stuff? Which was also the case there, by the way. They had this weird DLL site loading with very specific things, like that type of thing was never seen anywhere. We talked to other companies as well for sharing that type of information, and no one has seen that stuff before. So then it narrows it down to maybe not that many types of groups that would take it that far.
I think when I'm thinking of that, it's sort of the cost and the effort just keeps increasing for that threat actor, and that's really someone who is determined and is quite sophisticated in their approach to recognize and want to commit to that. Gosh,
Right.
that's
Then
incredible.
another interesting dimension is looking at what times of the day they're working. Because normally nation state actors work office hours.
Okay.
It's part of their daily job, right? So they start their activities like maybe 8, 9 in the morning until 4 or 5 in the afternoon, in whatever time zone they are located, right? So I mean, uh, like let's see, so UTC time, that's typically the time zone we use, right? So like
Yeah.
in Europe, then if they always start somewhere around 3 a.m. UTC, it's probably somewhere far east, right? That is starting their workday, and they don't work at all in the weekends.
Brilliant.
So yeah, that gives you another little pointer. So type of malware, times of the day when they work, persistence and sophistication, all these things together, then gradually you increase the confidence in your assessment.
Mm. Have you ever worried after your kind of assessment that, gosh, we've been on the wrong end here of a sophisticated threat actor? Are we ever going to become a target ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, we need, of course, be prepared for that type of activity as well. I mean, we work against sophisticated actors, so we take the measures that we need to take to protect from that and to detect attempts. Just like we recommend our customers, we have our own way of you know protecting ourselves. But yeah, that definitely needs to be something that we have to consider.
I think it must be really interesting for you as well, with all of that kind of not necessarily crowdsourced, but all of that visibility into your portfolio of customers and understanding what's happening in their incident responses. Does that make it easier for you to kind of build a defensive posture? Um, I think you've said before that you're able to kind of predict what an attacker's next step might be. How has that helped you in your defense?
Well, I mean, having the intel on how those actors operate can actually help you predict an attack sometimes. I mean, you can't rely on that, of course, but it gives us a little bit of an edge. Um and I mean, it really has to do with defense in depth, right? You need to have many layers, and you need to assume that some of those layers might fail and have something after, right? So, I mean, there is no perfect defense. You can just have a lot of them.
Yes.
So, but when it comes to predicting, I think, I mean, one thing is knowing pretty much how they operate, like where does it make sense to put more detection or protection or things like that. Uh, but then in some cases, it actually becomes like technically an actual prediction of an attack. And I give you another example. I think this is a fun story. Uh, uh, so this was a case. This was actually another case attributed to a nation state, uh, and they were. I mean, they were combining phishing with other types of attacks, but that's not the point. Uh, Point is, the way that they were setting up their attack infrastructure. Uh, After a while that we were studying them, we were kicking them out. They were trying to come back in, so they were setting up new infrastructure. Uh, so we started studying a pattern in how they were setting up their infrastructure. So, for example, they were always using the same registrar for the domain names. They were always having a certain patterns in the ports and services that they exposed. They would always uh, they would always sinkhole their own domains when they went offline. So you had you had malware on infected computers try to reaching out to a command and control server. So when they went offline, they switched that domain to localhost or 127.0.0.1, so it wouldn't actually call back until they went back to work, changed the DNS again, they started talking again. So that makes it for a clear pattern, right? So domains that switch between localhost and a new IP address, same registrar, same set of ports and fingerprints on those. So we started building a whole detection capability. It's like when they set up new infrastructure, we know it's actually very likely that this is what they're going to use next, and then we can already block it before they have a chance to use it. That was pretty cool, and it worked out very well because then you can really see yeah, we inform our affected customer that yeah, they're probably gonna come from this new 3 IP addresses tomorrow, so you should block them today, and then you see the next day they actually try and get blocked before they can even really try the attack. Uh, I mean, you don't always have that possibility, but when you do, it's actually pretty cool to see how it works.
I like that. And something I saw in the news as well recently was your partnership with Europol. So kind of taking those
Right.
lessons you're learning, and I really like kudos to all of you again for joining in with the No More Ransom project. I think fantastic global initiative. Um, am I right in thinking you've developed some tools?
Yeah, yeah, no, exactly. So in the case with Europol now, we published a set of decryptors for a ransomware family. So it includes different variations of similar type of ransomware. Uh, and it's always a question of like what should go public and what what you want to use to protect the victims without letting the threat actors know that we have a way to bypass their encryption. So it's always at this, like, but we do this in collaboration with law enforcement agencies and other partners. So this is normally a joint decision of what to publish that actually has more effect of helping affected companies, organizations, or even individual, private individuals, and what makes more sense to actually use to help affected victims without letting the actors know that we have a way around it. But yeah, this was a good example of using like cryptanalysis to actually break the encryption of the ransomware because it was done badly. In other cases, there are some other types of workarounds that you might still get back files without really breaking the encryption, but using some other tricks.
We'll save those for not on a public podcast. I think that's probably
Yeah,
best.
I guess so. Yeah.
I like the thing there as well about you're kind of talking through understanding, having kind of the lens of the attacker from the kind of red team exercises as well. And I think one of the things I was most interested to talk to you about was the attack or incident you investigated with a bit of a twist, where it's I won't spoil that, but I think it was gosh, when you were working for the organization and you figured out something very specific about the attacker and you had to struggle to not kind of reveal what you had worked out. So can you tell us a little bit more about that story?
Yeah, you mean for like the uh, insider story?
That's the one.
Yeah. So I mean, this actually has happened in multiple occasions that we investigate a case, and uh, the so one of the people, or yeah, one or more of the people working at the affected organization, uh, you may suspect that they might be an insider, so they actually had a part in the attack. um, and sometimes it can be, I mean, first of all, it's very hard to be sure, and we're not there really to judge that, but either we might get some indications from others, maybe their employer themselves, that or we have reason to believe based on their activities that we uncovered during the investigation that it looks like they maybe wanted to do it, or they were part of it. uh, and sometimes it can be, you see them try to like delete traces, a little bit sloppy maybe sometimes, and it can be just that they know they've not really done things properly. Maybe they felt bad because they clicked on a link or something and they tried to delete that, and that's understandable. From our perspective, we just need to understand what happened. We're not there to point fingers in any way, or but that's one thing. Another thing is when a person is actually maliciously trying to do something and then cover their traces. uh, and it might be for different motives. uh, it might be because they're angry at their employer or something, or maybe they are paid by an external party to give out information or give access. And this case I mentioned to you earlier about, it's actually a pretty interesting one because it wasn't just one person; it was actually several
Oh
uh,
wow.
at the same place, and they have pretty high access to the environment as well, which makes it very hard to deal. Because on one side you don't want to tell them that you're suspecting that, 'cause, they have full access to everything. So
Gosh.
it's very easy for them to start making your investigation a lot harder. uh, and they're also the people that are supposed to give you the data and the access that you need to do your investigation. So it becomes quite tricky to handle that situation, right? And uh, but we have other types of support that is not just technical. We have crisis management uh, and people that work more on the human side of an incident response. Uh, and that's a typical case where they need to be involved.
Yeah, I think crisis management's a light way of putting it when you realise it's as someone obviously with quite a significant amount of access into all of the technical environments as well, who are supplying with you information.
Right.
What what does that feel like when you are there and you realize this is kind of unfolding in front of you? What's going on in your head?
One thing that sometimes is not clear if you're just like you're doing an investigation, maybe you get like some, logs or disk or whatever to analyze from a forensic perspective, you do your job and so on. But when you're actually there in front of people and talking to people, maybe you're there on site, right? You're at their office, and uh, either you suspect that there is an inside there, or you're just talking to someone who is affected there. The human side of things is actually quite interesting and sometimes a little bit forgotten when we talk about these things.
Mm,
Uh, I mean, when it comes for the insider scenario, I mean, luckily for me, I haven't found myself in that many of those situations. Uh, but where I found myself often in is actually talking to a victim that uh, they they they're actually really really worried that they might not have a job the day after, or that they might not have a company left. They might go bankrupt because maybe all their production is down because their factories are shut down. They
mm,
might lose all their clients. They might lose all their business, and it's it's not just technical work really that we need to do there, because we need to go there and reassure them, bring that confidence, say, I mean, we've done this hundreds of times. We know what we're doing. It's okay. You take their hand, or you tap their shoulder, and we got this. Just that part actually helps a lot, and helps them to also focus on the things we ask them to do. Like, we need this and that from you. We're gonna fix all the rest. Don't think too much. This is what we need now. Go get it for us, please, and we'll get going. Um, but then you see how people react in different ways. It's also quite common that there is just one or two, maybe very few people that have all the answers in a company,
mm.
especially from an IT
Yeah.
perspective. That person that's been at the company for 35 years and know everything. Also all the things that are not documented anywhere, nobody else could find if they don't ask that person. So that becomes very much a single point of failure. And you really don't want that person to, just shut off and just have some kind of crisis and not be able to work anymore. So you really need to take care of the people. So that's a lot of stuff that goes through our mind too when we handle incidents and we have people in front of us. Like, you know let's make sure that people are fine, uh, because without those people we can't really do anything.
Gosh, that's such a like a huge weight of responsibility on your shoulders. Do you ever kind of struggle with compartmentalizing that to the job? Obviously, you kind of do your incident response, you get things back to a reasonably good position, and then, in want of a better term, you kind of have to walk away ready for the next incident response. Like how do you cope with that kind of switch off and into the next one?
Well, that's why we have many different roles, right? Normally, uh, incident managers handle a case also a little bit after we close the technical part to make sure everything is up and running. Um, so normally they have the broader perspective, um, one case end to end. From a technical perspective, yeah, you jump a lot between cases, but normally you stick with one until the technical part is done, because just the switching is a lot of overhead, and time that gets wasted just understanding and context switching and all that stuff. Uh, but then, I mean, it becomes it just becomes part of your daily job. So after a while, you don't react as much, and we have dedicated people that handle all the more like sensitive and human aspects, and also that's what they do all the time. So for them, it's also not that strange. It's just another day at the job.
I guess in your kind of role now, one of the things I would be thinking of is like how do I hire the right people for those conversations? And I guess a question for you for our listeners is what do you look for when you're looking for things like EQ and the way people can engage with people?
So, I mean, given that I'm not the one hiring those people, but at least I'm pretty sure I know what qualities they need to have. Uh, uh, I mean, obviously, structure is very important because you can't really be an incident manager without having a structure, because you're gonna get questions from all over the place, and you need to have a good structured way to answer them, and give estimations. You're gonna have your clients asking, when can we get back that system, and when can we do this, this, and that, and be able to give like concrete answers and handle the pressure, because it's gonna be pressure for different angles. Um, it's good to have some of the technical expertise yourself as well, at least on a level that you're not lost when there is a discussion about what solution to use or what's better. So I mean, all of our incident managers also have a technical background, at least to an extent that you can handle that discussion, because the customer is going to ask you, why shouldn't we go with this type of solution, or why can't we start internet connectivity from our office in Japan now? So they can't all the time ask the technical team and then get back. I mean, they need to have those conversations directly. So technical expertise is also important. Uh, then I think just not just for the incident manager, but working in an incident in general is quite demanding task. Also from a personal, from a private life perspective, you might be working at very strange times. You might want to make sure that your family is okay with that. You work in shifts normally, so I mean, you do get your sleep and all that stuff, but you might get your sleep in the day. You have to work in the night, depending on the case. So. Um, yeah, so it's a combination of those skills, and of course the people part, as well, right? You need to have those types of communications to keep the client calm. uh, Make sure you are explaining the situation well and clear, because if you leave some unclarities, it just makes them more stressed, and concerned, naturally. um, so that quality is quite important as well. Clear communication and be a calm person and handle pressure.
Sounds like some really critical kind of life skills there that are rarely taught. Really appreciate you kind of sharing those. I'm just thinking, kind of last sort of question on the human side, really. What are some great resources that could help people to kind of understand the kind of components of your organization and the different roles in there? So if I was a young 18-year-old Karl and I'm thinking of starting a career, where would you point people to learn?
Going back a little bit to what I said before about having the perspective of both, offensive, defensive, and uh, I mean, nowadays there are a lot of resources that help with many of these things. There is a lot of, like CTFs, pen testing courses, and all that stuff. There is so much free material online nowadays that wasn't available maybe 15 years ago. Um, so, I mean, pointed to specific resources, to be honest, I don't know. There is so much. But it's more of the approach to me that is important. So it's actually something that I say a lot to people that apply for jobs, or that ask for advice in how to apply for jobs, or how to get the necessary skills and experience to be able to apply for certain jobs. Is that I mean, if you want to do pen testing, for example, if you want to hack stuff, don't just do the hacking part. Try to build the systems first, then hack them, or make them vulnerable and then hack them, because that's how you really understand why something is vulnerable in the first place. If you want to hack web applications, do some web development, some simple stuff. Try to create some application yourself. You introduce a vulnerability on purpose, then you exploit it, then you fix it, and then you make sure you can't exploit it anymore. Going through that process um, really helps. uh, I mean, finding also other vulnerabilities and why they are there in the first place. And you can actually talk to your client and give them more realistic recommendations, instead of just saying, yeah, you have the vulnerability there, you got to fix it. um, you actually know why it's there in the first place, at least for the simple things. I mean, you might not be able to build an entire enterprise infrastructure in your lab if you've never done it before. But start with simple stuff. Set up some, bunch of servers, set up an Active Directory, and create like a fake office environment. Create your users. Create your own fake company, and just because that's something that I missed a lot when I started. When I
Mm.
said I had the academic background, I knew maybe how code looked like, how vulnerable code could look like, how to exploit certain things, but no one ever taught me what an enterprise environment looks like. I had no idea like what Active Directory was. And when I started doing pen testing, everyone was talking about Active Directory. I had no clue what it was. So it's like, uh, start from there, start building a very simple replica of what a small office could look like. Build some applications on top and try to configure some users and stuff, and then break it. Then you get both some of the blue side and both some of the red side. I think that's a great start to get into the industry.
Be a little bit more purple in your approach. Bit
Oh
of
yeah,
everything.
yeah, definitely
Yeah,
purple.
amazing. Thank you. I'm coming into my last two questions. The first one: is there something you wish I asked you today? Is there anything else you want to kind of put out into the world with this platform?
Yeah, I mean, there's always fun stories that are usually related to physical intrusions, which is usually the fun part of red teaming. Um, yeah, I mean, if you think it's interesting, talk about that.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I remember Sammy being on our kind of episode of the podcast, and Jason as well, and both of them having some great stories about physical kind of pen testing. I think Sammy,
Right, right.
Sammy, my favorite was the using a hedgehog to get through fingerprint scanning and smuggling one into Microsoft Ignite. But yeah, if you got a fun story about kind of a physical engagement or that first physical intrusion you'd like to share?
I mean, it wouldn't be as fun as a hedgehog, but yeah, no, I mean, I think it's just interesting to get in the mind of doing that, because it's you need a few tries before you can get it right, and act like you're not really really nervous. um, yeah, I mean, red teaming normally you have a lot of different attack vectors, right? And physical intrusion is probably the most fun to actually execute, but uh, you could argue it's not the most realistic type of attack. If you were to test something that is more likely to happen to you, uh, physical intrusion, you could argue it's maybe less relevant than
Mm,
doing phishing or exploiting internet facing things, which is what a normal cybercrime would do. For example, they would not start by trying to get into your office physically and expose themselves, right? Also, they probably do it from the other side of the world anyway. So
yeah.
uh, but yeah, then when you actually get to do it, it's really fun. I mean, um, this one time I remember that it was a lot. I remember it well because it was a time where I realized like being confident actually gets you through no matter what. uh, and I was not doing that alone, because one of the first ones I did, and it was this pretty large bank. Um, and so we went through the gate. It was me and another person with me, and he was acting like my manager. Uh, and so we had fake badges for that bank. So the day before, we found some people posting that online, like, oh, new
Nice.
employee, classic. And then you print it out with the badge printer. Then you have it. Of course, it wouldn't work to scan it, but you have it there. You look at you belong. So then we went in. I had a computer, and my colleague was basically just going around taking notes. And there was this reception with security guard there at the entrance, and they had computers there. And we knew like if we get to those computers, even before we cross the gates, we would be able to most likely reach the internal network from that computer, because they need to uh, register a meeting or whatever they need to do from those stations. Uh, but if you come straight from the outside, it's quite obvious that you're gonna be questioned, right? So like, who are you? You're coming from the outside. You want to do something here. So we went in first with like jackets and everything, and then we went around the building. There was some bathroom and stuff. And then we got basically changed, got off the jackets. And then after quite some time, we went back from that direction. And now it didn't look like we were coming from the outside anymore. So my colleague was just, taking notes, and I was pretending to be going around and measuring the network, whatever that meant. So I had a little device with me, and we were measuring all the network sockets we found. So we just went around, and he talked to the security guards and say, so how many printers do you have here? Okay, 1 and 2. Okay, because they only had one on the other side, right? Which we checked before. And then he started talking to them and said, oh yeah, he's just going to measure the network in the meantime. And then I had my box, and I went under and hit this little box in between. So then we basically just walked away, and then from the car reached the wireless, and we were in the internal network. And I think it's maybe a pretty standard type of story that you hear from this engagement. From my perspective, that was the time where, because I was so nervous, it was one of the first times I was doing it. But the person with me, he was so confident in how I was explaining that it was so clear to me that if you just act like that and you look right with the badge and everything, this is actually really, really simple to do. So it was a bit of an eye opener for me to do that. And then you get a bit more familiar with that over time. Then I've done some of those myself too.
The heart stops beating really fast constantly when you're on site, and you
That's right.
don't have to worry so much.
Yeah,
Amazing.
And you need to have a paper that says, that if you get caught, you need to have a paper that says I'm authorized to do it. Question is, are they going to trust that? Are they actually going to call someone to check that, or are they just going to call the police?
Yeah, after that. That's a lot going through your head in those moments. And then with the job on top, like not just thinking about your survival in the environment, but actually you've got work to do once you do survive. Gosh, incredible. Well, I've got my last question, which is a question left from another guest. So we kind of leave a question from each guest ready for the next guest.
Okay.
And this question is, who first believed in you, and what would you say to them now?
Okay, who first believed in me? He's actually the founder of Truesec, Marcus Murray. And he's been with me through my whole journey. He was actually the one answering that email I sent out as a student looking for a master thesis to do. He was one of the very few answering those emails, and then we got in touch. Then he also, we were a very different organization back then, so it was a little bit strange to have me just with no prior professional experience coming straight from university. I was also the only one not speaking the local language here, because I moved to Sweden like a year before. I didn't speak the language, but he believed in me, and gave me the opportunity to start here, and then I grew. And he's also the person who now suggested me as CTO for the role I got recently. So well, what I would tell him now, we still work together a lot. So I talk to him every day. I tell him things every day. I'm just very grateful for the opportunity. And I'm also very happy that opportunity for me actually turns out in a lot of other opportunities as well, because we then started hiring other people that had a profile that wasn't really the standard profile that everyone was expecting someone new to have when they started here, because I kind of broke that profile myself. So that opened up new doors, which we are really leveraging now, and that's how we grew so much. So I just grateful to have had the opportunity myself and be able to transfer that to others today.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. And that kind of brings us towards the end of our time, unfortunately. I think we could probably do multiple episodes together with a few more of those stories as well. It's been absolutely incredible to have you as part of this. And just thank you so much, Fabio, for sharing some of your life with all of the listeners of the podcast. I really appreciate you, and say thanks for coming on board.
It's been a great pleasure.